Holy cow. The world's oldest central bank is begging for a bailout. This is bad news. You should be afraid. Let's talk about it. Okay, so happy Halloween, everyone. So while we've been distracted with the prospects of a World War III brewing and distracted by all sorts of weird social issues, we've had a development on the financial world stage that you should know about and you should be worried about. So let's refer to an article out of Zero Hedge, and then we'll talk about how this affects you. The world's oldest central bank seeking $7 billion bailout after massive bond losses. 2 weeks ago, we reminded the world that thanks to soaring interest rates, which will only keep rising until the Fed figures out what big enough crisis it uses to trigger QEX12, the staggering losses on global fixed income securities, which, according to the IIF, amount to $307 trillion, as calculated by DB's Jim Reed, have risen to a staggering $107 trillion. And while thanks to such facilities as the BTFP, much of the mark-to-market risk has been transferred, if only for the time being, away from commercial banks and to the Fed, the cumulative losses at central banks are now absolutely staggering, starting with the biggest and baddest one of all, where the Fed operating loss is now $111 billion and rising every day that the Fed pays out more in interest to banks and money markets than it collects in its bond portfolio. All right, so let's take a look at the Federal Reserve's operating loss. This is what's happened just since late 2021. Look at that. The Federal Reserve is bleeding money. So let's be clear on what's going on here. As interest rates have gone up so dramatically, the Federal Reserve is having to, sustain, to keep afloat, to prop up the commercial banking system. These banks are in serious trouble, and the Federal Reserve is spending a lot of money in order to keep them on life support. But that's not going to last very long. Because remember, what's the largest asset that the banks keep on the books? Yes, federal bonds. And remember that the value of bonds have an inverse relationship to interest rates. As interest rates go up, the balance of the bonds go down. Now, the banks have a little, accounting trick, right? They use mark to market. I mean, listen, we will get the face value of our bonds as long as we hold on to maturity. So we're going to ignore today's market value of the bonds, but they're not going to be able to get away from that. That's an accounting trick. Banks are going to be going out of business. The only reason why the Federal Reserve has been able to get away with this so far is because the Federal Reserve prints the world's reserve currency. At the moment, it's the world's reserve currency, right? But that's how they're able to get away with it. Let's go back to the article. While the cumulative mark-to-market loss on its multi-trillion-dollar bond and mortgage-backed security portfolio is now a staggering, hold on to your hats, $1+ trillion, this despite unwinding more than $1 trillion in assets on its balance sheet since early 2022. And yet, as everyone knows by now, the Fed will never go bankrupt thanks to the printing of the world's reserve currency. That's right, the accounting treatment of record income or balance sheet losses is, well, none. They just assume that the Fed will print merely enough money to plug any hole, and so the Fed is exempt from the ordinary rules of capitalism, where a big enough loss will eventually put you out of business, which is a bit of a philosophical paradox. On the one hand, the Fed, by default, remits its profits to the Treasury, be they $1 or $1 trillion. Yet, when it has a net loss at the end of the year, the Treasury is not bound to bail them out, which is the sweetest form of crony capitalism ever conceived, and is by far the biggest benefit of whatever nation is the issuer of the world's reserve currency du jour. Now, the US dollar is at the moment the world's reserve currency, so we can get away with this scam. Now, if you and I tried to do this privately, we would be put in jail. This is the corruption of government, and this process is destroying the value of your dollars. So the Federal Reserve is enjoying and abusing the status of the US dollar as a world's reserve currency. The same, however, cannot be said for other central banks, such as the Bank of England, which about 100 years ago relinquished global reserve currency status to the US, and which 1 year ago had to be bailed out by the UK Treasury after the central bank suffered its first huge losses from the QE program. So we are still feeling the effects of the QE bailout from the 2008 to 2010 financial crisis, my friends. And the same can certainly also not be said for the world's oldest and arguably most experiment of central banks, Sweden's Riksbank, which not only is the world's oldest central bank, but also the first one to implement negative rates. Now it hopes also to be the first one to surpass the BOE in getting the biggest central bank bailout in history. In a press release by Riksbank Governor Erik Thedéen before the Swedish Parliament's Committee on Finance Tuesday, he said that the now insolvent central bank needs a capital injection of at least 80 billion Swedish kronas, or just over 7 billion US dollars, representing a little over 1% of Sweden's GDP. Okay, I'm not going to go over the rest of the article here to respect your time. The upshot of all this, what you need to be worried about, what you need to be afraid about, happy Halloween, is that central banks around the world are twisting themselves into proverbial pretzels in order to keep their economies afloat, in order to continue this Ponzi scheme, a scheme that if anyone else did would be put in jail. Now, the Federal Reserve is in the enviable position of being the guardian of the world's reserve currency, at least at the moment, right? But that game is going to come to a very ugly end, even for us here. But before we go under, the other central banks are going to see it first. And we're starting to see it happen in other central banks. And the biggest and obvious, financial canary in the coal mine at the moment is Sweden's central bank. But their issues are not unique. This is a global phenomenon. So why do you need to be worried about this? Is because your local bank is not safe. We're going to see bank failures like we've never seen before. And if you have your money in the bank, you're at risk of having your money stolen from you. Remember, any money you're sitting in your bank is legally not considered your money. You are considered an unsecured creditor. Did you know that? Your money is legally not considered your money. The good news is you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be a victim. Follow our mantra. Reduce your exposure to the damn bank, put a bunch of your money into gold and silver, and establish streams of passive recurring income. It just so happens that Rob and I are doing a launch Zoom next week where we're going to be unveiling a project that we've been working on now for months in order to show all of you out there how you can create streams of passive recurring income online. If you'd like to attend that Zoom, reach out to us via email, and we'll send you a link for that Zoom. It's going to be November 2nd. That's next Thursday. We're doing 2 Zooms to allow for time differences around the world, and we would love to have you in those Zooms. Now, if you're watching this after the event and you'd still like to have more information, again, reach out to us, and we'll fill you in. But we would love to have you in that launch Zoom if you can make it. So yeah, things are happening out there that you need to know about, but you don't have to be afraid of it. You can take advantage of it, actually. I encourage you to give our mantra real consideration. Ed Anderson, roving reporter for the Unspoken Truth, live from Minnesota, signing out.
Copy that.